Will you join me in the prayer for illumination? It's all about living together. As we open these pages, may we find a breath of fresh air, a word for our hearts, and a light for our path. Amen. That feels right. 2 Samuel 12. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, "There were two men in a certain city. The one was rich, and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his morsel, and drink from his cup, and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer that had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who came to him. Then King David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, 'As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and had no pity.' Nathan said to David, 'You are the man.'" The word of the Lord. Our second exciting reading comes from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 26. That's on 861 in your RSV Bible, and 1066 in your NIV if you would like to follow along. And instead of Matthew 26, let's read from Matthew 25, as it's printed in your book. Matthew 25, verse 31. Jesus is speaking to his followers. "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels are with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats will be on his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those on his left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and not minister to you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it not to the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." We believe this to be the word of God. How difficult it is to recognize oneself. Imagine the scene from the first reading, if you will. King David is in his royal court doing his royal court things, and in a hurried step walks in the royal prophet, Nathan, clicking across the marble floor. Nathan opens with a parable that David listens intently to, as boring as it might be. A rich man lives in a city. He has so many flocks and herds and heads of cattle that he needs a live, updated Bloomberg report to keep track of just how rich he is at a given moment. He loves nothing more than seeing the ticker indicate his wealth going up moment by moment. Tick, a baby calf. Tick, the new foal that his daughter had been waiting for. Tick, tick, twins. A guest drops in unannounced. An old friend from Hebrew University. Our man's pulse rises. He hadn't accounted for, he hadn't emotionally prepared himself for the small sheep that he'd have to slaughter in order to entertain his old friend. His pulse drops again as he remembers that scabby old man one neighborhood over. The one with the daughter and with the lamb that he drags all over town and is always petting and cooing over. The rich man summarily calls him in, sends him to take the lamb from the poor man. The aide then hands it off to the household personal chef, who prepares a lovely meal. And they all enjoyed eating it very much. David listens to this story intently from Nathan, and as he's listening, his anger rises. He's outraged. The text says that David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. Here you have to give it to David for expressing the moral indignation, it seems, that the rest of us have to numb ourselves to sort of get through your average news cycle. But Nathan's next words come as a shock to our hero. You are the man. I wonder if the shock of recognition happened all at once to David. Gasp! I'm the bad rich man! Or if David had a more gradual recognition. Or even if he ever recognized himself at all in this story. Of course, that David is the antagonist of Nathan's parable comes as no surprise to us as the reader. Just in the previous chapter in the Bible I was reading from, it's on the same pages, we find the story of David and Bathsheba, where David sees Bathsheba bathing on the roof, he rapes her. Sometime later, he hears that she's pregnant, and he murders her husband in order to save face. All in that chapter. David does not recognize himself even in Nathan's much tamed down allegory, wherein he is represented merely as a wealth-obsessed tyrant. The moral failure behind the hideous acts, both in the parable and in David's actions, is the same, I think. In both, there's a powerful actor and a powerless subject. And the powerful one sees the powerless one only as a means to his end, whether enjoyment of food or otherwise. That is, he failed to recognize the humanity of the person right in front of him. Seeing a human, David merely recognizes a means to satisfy his hunger, to stem his anxieties. Failing to recognize the humanity in another's eyes, it should come as no surprise to us that David fails to recognize the human substance behind the parable. He sees only the opportunity, again, to act out an abstract notion of justice. Just like Bathsheba, he only wants to use her, just like this man in the parable, he only wants to use him to act out his duties as a king. Nathan the prophet throws David's failure of moral reckoning back on himself when he reveals that the face of the one that David wants to punish is David's own. How difficult it is to recognize oneself. How difficult it can be to recognize the humanity in another person. These great ethical themes are taken up by Jesus in our second reading, with a subversive twist that makes us reconsider our first story. The passage that we read in Matthew is part of a collection of teachings and sayings of Jesus that are all clustered together towards the end of the Gospel of Matthew. It seems that these memories were so important to the authors that they just had to get them in somewhere in the Gospel, even if they didn't fit perfectly in the narrative flow. And so they stuck them together and put them right at the height of the drama, as their Jesus tale climaxes. It's right after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and just the day before the Passion starts. The next day would be his Last Supper with his disciples. It's as if the writers are holding these sayings up and saying, hey look, This stuff's important. In this consummate teaching of Jesus, he gives his followers a glimpse into a vision of another world, of heaven on earth that was ever before him, leading him on. This kingdom of heaven, Jesus tells his disciples, is constituted by a certain class of people who have a particular type of sight. To those who make up this heaven on earth, Jesus says, "You are the kingdom because when I was hungry you fed me. You are the kingdom because when I was thirsty you gave me drink. When I was a stranger you invited me in. When I was sick you took care of me. When I was in prison you visited me." I could imagine the disciples, upon hearing this teaching, thinking within their own minds, would I be a part of heaven? I mean, I helped with the loaves and the fishes, but I didn't often see Jesus too hungry. In that eerie way he had of seeming to hear folks' unasked questions, Jesus continues in this parable. They will ask, when did we see you naked, or see you hungry? The answer, of course, whatever you did for the least of my brothers and sisters, you did to me. This passage's status as cultural cliche, I think, belies its true power. We see it crocheted and cross-stitched and on Facebook statuses. But I think that to see the humanity behind another's eyes is to see Christ, is what Jesus is saying here. Victor Hugo's famous line comes to mind, and it's full of the same profundity. To love another person is to see the face of God. But again, how hard it is to recognize the divine image in another person. Jesus grapples with the difficult nature of the task in the next section. He continues describing those who will not constitute a heaven on earth. I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Again, his proverbial questioners ask, Lord, when did we see you? Truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Jesus' words do not seem to create much middle ground. There is no gray here for him between those two types of people. But then again, what is the difference between the two types of people? Neither type recognizes the presence of Christ behind the eyes of those in need. Lord, when did we see you? Just as King David in the first reading did not recognize his own presence behind Nathan's portrait of the evil rich man. If we cannot recognize the specific presence behind another's eyes, how are we to become those who feed and clothe and visit and care for Christ? The answer, I think, is as simple as it is difficult. I believe that these passages point us to image heaven on earth by living as if we can see the divine behind each other's eyes. And this is no mean feat. To consciously develop our affections, to feel for every person their divinely gifted humanity, is a spiritual task of a lifetime. It's the spiritual task of a community's lifetime. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a program of nonviolent resistance that was constructed precisely in line with this spiritual goal. One particular malaise that he identified in the United States was white America's inability to recognize the humanity behind the eyes of black men and women and boys and girls. And as Nathan constructed a scenario to shock David out of his non-recognition, so did Martin Luther King orchestrate his mass protests. His plan was to take the violence that occurred out from behind the scenes and into the broad daylight. By having masses of people passively receiving blows without striking back, King hoped that the brutal policeman might be shocked into recognizing that the one whom he was hitting was fully human, brimming with life and love, pain, but also possibility. King hoped that by viewing these protests and beatings on television, The rest of America might likewise be shocked into the recognition of the humanity of all of their neighbors. But how hard it is to recognize the divine image in each other. And now here we are, on another Sunday at Grace Presbyterian Church. We come here variously hoping, I believe, to become like those heaven-on-earthers to whom Christ might say, "Blessed are you, because when I was hungry, you fed me." And I believe we come here hoping to become less like David in this story, less in need of a violent shock to reset our vision. In a few moments, we will pass the peace to one another, and in a few more, we will share our prayers with one another. Next week, we will share bread and wine and communion, and welcome back Pastor Beck. I think that one way to look at all of these is as a practice of affection, of lovingly recognizing the divinely stamped humanity in each other, and giving and receiving gifts in response. And in giving these gifts to each other on Sunday, we might be able to continue our practice on to Monday. If you would bear with me for a moment of spiritual practice and reflection, and if you feel comfortable, and there's someone you know or wouldn't mind knowing a little bit better next to you, I'd like you to turn to someone next to you and look them in the eyes for 10 seconds. I'll keep time. Go. It's been 10 seconds. But don't completely look away. I'd like you to still stay looking. And then, but it doesn't have to be as intense. And if you could say after me a little prayer of recognition. God, I see a blessed human in front of me. Behind whose eyes Christ shines out. Amen. If you would join me in our affirmation of faith printed in your bulletin.